To be with you this morning. We started talking last week a little bit about life and about the different stages of life. And I talked about how when you're on this end of the spectrum down here, it seems like it's long and forever and things are never going to happen and you're never going to get there. When you get on the end down here, it seems like it's just a minute. But in every stage of life, there's challenges, isn't there, and things we have to face and talk about. And we talked a lot about children last time and youth and the idea of maybe growing into an adult and some of what that entailed and different challenges to our faith. And that changes as we mature and as things in our life change and we grow older, that changes. But today I want to talk to you a little bit about midlife or the start of that. I think I'm kind of a little past my prime. I tried to figure that out, but I'm pretty sure I'm on the downhill side. And they say that age is relative, right? Picks up speed when you head downhill, so I guess that's true. But this morning I want to kind of bring back and talk a little bit about this idea of transitioning, what my kids like to call into adulting. Right? My kids like to say that, and they say, we hate that. We wish we could go back and be a kid. Once they got to be an adult and figured out how that worked, they thought it was kind of nice to be back home where they didn't have to do all that stuff anymore. And I can kind of understand that a little bit, right? But the truth is that as we transition into that, there's things we have to decide and choices in our life that are really going to affect our whole life. I like to think that life is like a series of plateaus, right? And you kind of hit these plateaus and you kind of stay there for a while until something big happens that changes you, right? You either go up or you go down, but things happen. And when we're young, things seem to happen faster. We're going to school, we're making decisions about our education, about our college, about our spouse, about all these things. Things seems to happen quicker. Once you kind of get past that, you kind of hit that plateau and you kind of stay there for a long time. But the truth is that things happen quick, and there's a lot of decisions that need to be made. There are a lot of important decisions that need to be made, and I think that's something as a young adult, something you have to really kind of consider. We talk a lot about marriage, about the idea that that's what we need to do, get married. And a lot of times we push our kids into that maybe, or push them into finding a spouse. But the Bible doesn't always really back that up. The Bible doesn't say that you have to be married. We talk a lot about children, about how children are a blessing from God. Blessed is the person who quivers full, and all these scriptures we use about that. And I believe children are a blessing from God, and I've been blessed with my children. But the Bible doesn't say we have to have children. The Bible doesn't command that. It's decisions we have to make. And all of us as individuals, we make those decisions, and then we're going to live with those decisions for a long, long time when we make them. So those are big things. It's a big decision. Should be a big decision. Big decision to get married. Should be a big decision to have children. That's a big responsibility and something we have to think about. And so I understand those ideas. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 7, he says, I want you to be free from concern. One who is unmarried is concerned about the things of the Lord, how he may please the Lord, but he who is married is concerned about things of the world, how he may please his wife, and his interests are divided. The woman who is unmarried and the virgin is concerned about things of the Lord, that she may be holy both in body and spirit, but one who is married is concerned about the things of the world, how she may please her husband. This I say to you for your own benefit, not to put a restraint upon you, but to promote what is appropriate and to secure undistracted devotion to the Lord. Paul kind of makes this point here. He says marriage is a big thing, right? And when you get married, you get concerned about the things of your spouse, and rightly you should. Rightly, that's something that we should do. And the truth is, most of us probably desire that relationship and desire that. But Paul says if you don't, and if you're all right without that, that's fine. But the thing he says is, if you don't desire that, it really should give you more devotion to the Lord, more time for the Lord, more time to fill your life with those things instead of with the idea of being married. And so I think, as a society, we push people towards that, and we almost we always say marriage is a biblical thing and a husband and wife, and we'll talk about that. But the other idea and the other flip of that is if people decide that's not in their life, that's not in their plan, that's a biblical idea too. That's something that Paul even says maybe could be beneficial, right? Maybe there's things that not being married could be beneficial to a person in their life. So I think it's just another consideration. And I think it helps us kind of to broaden the view maybe of what we think, because I think so many times we really put marriage on that godly track and the idea that we need to have a spouse, we need to be married, that woman was created for man, and we'll talk about that. But the truth is that, we need to understand that that's a decision too that has to be made. Marriage is a really big decision. And everything we put in our lives, and I want to talk about that a little bit this morning, everything we put in our lives takes away from something else in our life. And that comes with spouses and marriage and children and jobs and everything else that you do. There's only so much you. There's only so much of you. That all of us, we only have so much time, we only have so much energy, we only have so much life. If you took your life and considered, of course, y'all don't use checkbooks anymore. I know those are a thing of the past. My kids couldn't balance a checkbook if their life depended on it. But the truth is that, years ago we used to have a checkbook and we had a balance. And you had so much money, and you wrote your checks, you took away from that balance. If you kind of think of your life, your every day of your life, that's kind of how it is. You wake up with so much, and you're going to use that up throughout your day, throughout your time. And everything you put in there, it takes away from something. And that's something it took me a long time in life to realize, and I don't know that I'm 100% there, because I still overcrowd my life. But the truth is that we really need to think about that idea in our lives. What are we going to commit it to? What are we going to devote ourselves to? What's going to take up what's going to be our passion? What's going to be the things that are going to absorb us in our life? Because those things are going to take something from us. When you decide to go to school, you decide to go to college, you're going to take something away from another aspect of your life to do that. When you decide to have a job, whatever job that is, or relationship you're in, whatever car you drive, whatever house you own, whatever way you do that, you're going to pay a price for that in your life. That's just life. That's just a fact, and it's something that we have to understand, and we need to understand as we get older. Paul says, "Yet I wish that all men were even as I myself am. However, each man has his own gift from God. One in this manner, another in that. But I say to the unmarried and the widows, it is good for them to remain, even as I. But if they do not have self-control, let them marry, for it is better to marry than to burn with passion." So Paul says, some people are able to do that, some are not. That's a decision you have to make. If you're not able to do that, not able to control your passion, your lust, your desire, then God gives you an avenue for that in marriage. God gives you an avenue. So that's God's way to deal with that. And that should be our way to deal with that. But it's still it's a decision that we have to make. It's interesting, in the beginning, God created man out of the dust, but what's probably more fascinating is that God created woman out of man. I always think that's fascinating in creation. God didn't create woman from dirt. Women, you're not dirt, just telling you. Men are dirt. We're dirt, right? And y'all are better than that because you weren't made from dirt, right? God created you for a purpose, just as he created man for a purpose. God created woman for a purpose. It was a purposeful creation. She was taken out of man, and for this reason a man shall leave his father and his mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. The truth of marriage, when you consider that as that point in your life, I would tell you to choose wisely. Marriage is a big decision. Kids are a big decision. Something that you should consider, pray about, contemplate, have people pray with you. I think that when I was young and I was so in love with Susie, I still am, all these years later, but I was so in love with her when I was young, and I just dove right into that situation, and nobody told me what to do or how to do it, and we didn't go to marriage counseling. We didn't do any of those things. Probably not the best decision in my life, honestly. Should have been prepared. Should have took advantage of some of those resources. Maybe would have saved me some stumbles along the way. But that wasn't who I was. If you know me, I'm the kind of guy that jumps first, asks questions later. And it worked out wonderfully for me, but it doesn't always do that. You know, as Christians, we have a responsibility to help our young people, to counsel our young people, to tell them about marriage and tell them about that relationship and tell them what that entails, because it is a really big decision, isn't it? It's something that God put in place for us to do, to help each other, and that's what marriage should be. And if I was to give you, and I will give you that wisdom, I hope, in a minute, about children, that's one thing I would do. It. Marriage is between a man and a woman, and marriage is for life. I think sometimes we forget that, don't we? I know when I was 18 years old and I was standing there marrying my wife, I was 18 years old. I wasn't really an old 18. I was kind of a young 18. And I was getting married to my wife when I was 18 years old. And I'm just promise you, when you're 18 years old and you're marrying the woman that you love or the man that you love, and you are doing that and saying those vows, and that preacher, which I never say that when I marry people, but he says, till death do you part. I promise you, at 18, that doesn't mean anything to you. Doesn't mean anything at 18 years old. You don't think about that. You're on this end, right? And it's a long ways to that other end, right? But when you get older, you start to realize what that means, what marriage is, what that covenant is, what that commitment is. And I'm not going to do a lesson on marriage and divorce and all that right now. I'm giving you the ideal, okay? God wants us to stay married our entire life. And he wants us to choose our spouse wisely. Wisely. You know, I always told my kids 2 or 3 things about marriage, and a lot of these kids here, Carson and Rebecca were there in those little sessions. Other kids that were there in those sessions around our center island when my kids were young, and I used to tell them about getting married. And of course, the first thing I told them, and none of them listened to it at all, was marry rich and learn to love them. None of them got that, right? Don't know why, just it didn't stick. You know, it just didn't stick. But the other thing I always told them is that love without respect is pity. You know, love without respect is pity. You need to respect the person that you're going to marry. You need to respect them for who they are and what they are. And the other thing I've always told my kids, and what I would tell our young people is, when you get married, marry someone who makes you better. You know, marriage isn't like buying an old classic car. You know, you don't want to buy that thing to have to fix it up. You know what I mean? And people try to do that. They find somebody like, well, I can change them, I can fix them. No, that's not what you do. You want to marry somebody that you're better with that person than you are without them. Marry somebody who makes you better, who lifts you up, who encourages you, who makes you the person that you can be and that you deserve to be. Never marry somebody with the idea that you'll work it out or fix it. Be fixed before you get married. Have that worked out. Marry someone who's going to make you a better person. Marry someone who's going to love you, who's going to take care of you, who's going to nurture you, who's going to help you fulfill your dreams. Marry someone who's going to lift you up and not hold you back. God expects us in marriage to be the support that each other needs, to be the people that God intends for us to be. That's God's idea of marriage. God's idea of marriage was never the idea that we need to marry one another to make each other better, to make each other fix each other. God's idea of marriage was it needs to be the vehicle to make us who we need to be in the Lord. And that's what marriage should be. And if we look at it that way and we embrace it that way, it makes a difference. When you're young and you're in love and it blinds you, right? That stage of infatuation that we have for 6 months or a year or 2 or 3 years, however long infatuation, I think psychologists say last 6 months, but that stage of infatuation where that person can do nothing wrong and that person's perfect and that person's wonderful and that person's everything you dreamed or desired. Get over that before you get married. That's all I'm telling you, all right? Because that's not life. That's not how it is. And that's something I think God would have us do, something we need definitely to consider. But you know, after that, we had to transition to what we would call the prime of life. I don't really know where we get that. I think I'm past my prime. But we get into the prime of life, we call it, right? And the prime of life is this interesting period of life where you have marriage, and if you get married, and kids if you have kids, and your job, and all these other things that are pushing upon you and taking from you, and you have stuff. You have stuff, a lot of stuff. I have a lot of stuff, too much stuff, right? I'm going to tell you, too much stuff. Because the truth is, stuff takes away from you. Stuff steals you away. I mean, I don't know any other way to say it, and I have a lot of stuff, and I'm guilty of this same thing, but everything you put in your life is taking away from something else in your life. And we don't realize that, I think, sometimes when we're young. We think, oh, I want that house. I really want this big, nice, this house. This is the house I want. But nobody ever tells you when you're a kid that when you get that big house, it's got big insurance and big taxes and big maintenance, and there's always something broken. Right? And pretty soon you can devote yourself to that house because you've always got to mow the grass. You've always got to paint something. You always got to fix something. You always got to do something, right? And that house is taken away from your life. It's the same way with a nice car, a big vehicle, or any other thing you do. It can be the same thing with your job or any other thing that you put in your life. It's going to steal. There's only so much you. You got to remember that in life. There's only so much time, so much energy, so much money, so much ability. And everything you put in your life is going to take away from something else in your life. And I think that's the biggest problem with the prime of life and faith. Because I want to tell you, this is a bad piece. This is wisdom, but it's bad wisdom. Well, it's not bad wisdom. It's just true wisdom. But it hurts me to say it. I want to tell you, in life, when you have something, you have too much to do and too many things going, which we all are going to do. You're all going to do that in your life. You're going to have to steal from something to make something else work. That's how life works, okay? You got to steal from something to make something else work, okay? And we all do it. We do it every day. Now, the truth is that I'm going to steal from things that I'm going to get away with it. Right? How about you? Aren't you going to do the same thing? So when that job gets really, really important and really, really pressing, and they're pushing you to get it done, and they're pushing you to put in overtime, and they're pushing you for this, they're pushing you for that, and you got to work late, and you got to do all that thing, then you're going to steal that from something else. When your kids are real involved in sports and they're real involved in school and they got all this stuff going on and they want you to be here and they want you to be there and you need to go see this, you need to go do that, and you're going to steal that time from something else. Now, maybe your grass isn't going to get mowed. Maybe your house ain't going to get painted, right? But the truth is that we steal it from the people we know we can get away with it. We steal it from our spouse. We steal it from our children. And the biggest thing is we steal it from God. Don't we? I think that's the hardest thing about being busy, being in your prime, being when everything's going on, when your kids are there, especially when your kids get to be, teenagers and middle schoolers, and man, your life gets so filled up with everything, right? Band and sports and school and this and that and whatever else, and boyfriends and girlfriends and cars and everything else that's going on in your life. And you're going to steal that from something. And your faith inevitably will suffer if you steal that time from God. And we do, because God doesn't gripe. God doesn't give us a hard time. If we say, well, I need to be gone, I really need to miss it. I've just been so busy, I'm just so tired, the kids are just wearing me down, we'll just skip this Sunday, or we'll skip this Wednesday, or we'll skip whatever. God doesn't come to your doorbell and ring. God doesn't show up and ring your doorbell and say, I really missed you, right? Your boss might do that, your kids might do that, your spouse might do that, but God doesn't do that. So the truth is, we steal from everything to make something else work. I do it every day. I do it every day of my life. I steal from something to make something else work. You can ask my wife. I've stole a lifetime from her because of work and because of other things and because of this and that. We do. It's life. It's how we do it. But when we start stealing from God, we suffer. That needs to be on the top. We need to steal from other things to make God work instead of stealing from God to make other things work. And I think that's part of prime of life. And Ecclesiastes Solomon says, rejoice, young man, during your childhood, and let your heart be pleasant during the days of young manhood. And follow the impulse of your heart, the desires of your eyes, yet know that God will bring you to judgment for all these things. So remove grief and anger from your heart and put away pain from your body, because childhood and the prime of life are fleeting. Amen. Childhood and the prime of life are fleeting. You know, the truth is, it's going to change. You know, there was times when my kids were young and little and home, I thought, this is never going to end. Really, I thought that. But the truth is it did, right? It did. And sometimes I wish I could go back, but you can't go back. There's no do-overs. There's no seconds. You can't do that. You know, I'm like that guy, there's a comedian I listen to all the time, and he says, you know, he's ready for that phone call when the psychiatrist calls up on his kids one day and starts telling him what he did wrong in their childhood, and he says, I'm going to say, oops. You know, what am I supposed to do? Do over? You know, you can't change it, right? It is there. It is what it is. And I think that's that way with life. It's fleeting. I always tell parents, and I always see that look in their eyes when they're tired and they give out and their kids have run them down, because we've all been there. If you're a parent, you've been there. And I always want to tell them one thing, and I always tell them one thing. I say, I promise you one thing, this will not last. This will not last. It's going to change. And when it changes, even though it seems like forever right now, when it changes, you're going to say, man, that was just a minute. It was just a minute in my life. But as we get in this place, the other thing that happens is we become providers to people around us. We have to start taking care of people. And that's really tough. Because as kids, we've always been taken care of, haven't we? We've always been, hopefully, as a child, I hope, you've always been taken care of. Things have been provided for you. You know, I've said earlier in the sermon last Sunday that parents should provide for their children or save up for their children. And this morning I'm going to tell you the flip of that. Because the truth is, as we get older, we start to become the provider. And God puts a responsibility on us, doesn't he? To provide for our family, to provide for our household, to do that and to make them happy and to give them those things that they need. Not maybe what all they want, but to give them those things they need in their lives. And Paul says in 1 Timothy, he says, if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. You know, we have this burden to put upon us, don't we? And people look towards us to provide. And that's a big strain on an individual. It can really be a strain to know that you're that person that has to provide for that family, for your children, for those people that are under your control. That's tough. And I know women and men that work and that go out and make that living, and they're thinking about their family, and they're thinking about providing for their family. And you know, the truth is, we need to provide financially for our family, but we need to provide spiritually for our family too. And sometimes those things kind of work against each other a little bit. To try to make time, make that balance. You know, am I just providing what they need? And am I providing what they need spiritually? Or am I going to work so hard to give them what they want that I'm going to neglect them? I'm not going to be there with them. I'm not going. Those are decisions. Those are decisions we all make in our lives. Where we spend our time. Remember, there's only so much. There's only so much of us. Where do we spend our time? Where would God have you spend your time? I mean, maybe that's the question you need to ask. Where would God have you spend your time? He would have you spend it in their presence as much as possible, and he would have you spend it with them in worship. He would have you spend it with them in faith and in study and what God wants to do. The truth is, in my life, sometimes I've worked so hard to give my family what they wanted that I forgot to give them what they needed. And that's a real problem that you can face in life. You can work so hard to give them what they want that you forget to give them what they need. As a provider, it's your responsibility not just to provide for them, not just to put food in their stomach and a roof over their head. It's your job to give them what they need spiritually, to provide for them in a spiritual manner. I think maybe that's the hardest thing in that stage of life, is to find that balance, to find out what you are and who you are and where your faith fits into that, and to somehow put God at the center of a really busy life. And I understand how busy that can be and the challenges that can be. And as a congregation, we so need to support our young people because of that very thing. In 1 Timothy 5, it says, "But if any widow has children or grandchildren, they must first learn to practice piety in regard to their own family and to make some return to their parents, for this is acceptable in the sight of God." John says he really hated it when I said he had to provide for Reese, but now this is the flip right here. This is the flip, right? So, you know, the truth is we get into our prime of lives and our parents' age, and all of a sudden we not only become the provider for our family, but oftentimes we become the provider or the support, maybe not just financially, but also the support mentally, spiritually for our parents. That's a hard place to be. It's someplace I'm at. That's my life right now. That's where I'm at. It's where you have to make a decision to honor your father and mother and to respect them and to provide for them and to give them those things they need and to try to transition with them as they transition into a part of their life that's on the opposite end of that beginning, right? It's on the end. And we're going to talk about that next Sunday. We're going to talk about that next Sunday. But the truth is, you and I have to learn to transition to silver. I'm kind of already there. Kind of made the transition. But in life, when we get to that prime, there's another transition. We have to transition to silver. We have to transition to another phase, another part of our life. We fall off that plateau. We have to learn to let go of our children. We have to learn to live with our spouse again in a house without children and without all those things that children bring into our home. And it's not that your children disappear. Trust me, your children never disappear. As long as you feed them, they'll come. But it's not the same as when they're in your house and when they're underneath your feet. And a lot of people so struggle with that. Empty nest, we call it, right? And they struggle with that transition into not having those things in their life and in their house. And they have to learn to love each other again. And they have to learn to talk to each other again. And they have to learn to find things they want to do together again. And it's different. It's a stage. It's a transition. And we need to be able to do that. Some people are so wound up in their children. I can't tell you the marriages I've known in my life that they got married young, they had children young, and when their children left, they divorced. Because the honest thing was the children and what was holding them together. It was what was binding them. As married people, we need to be bound to each other in ways that are internal and intrinsic and not tied to things external, because external things are going to change in our life as we get older. We have to become a parent to our parents. I'm going to tell you, that's one of the most difficult things to deal with in your life. And if you live long enough and your parents live long enough, at some point you're going to become a parent to your parents. And that's something we're going to talk a little bit about next Sunday morning, is that making that transition into that and the things that go with it. We have to face our own mortality and our frailties. You know, the truth is I take care of my parents and see what's going on in their life, I know that I'm not really far behind them. And that one time that's going to be my life, and I'm going to be depending on my children. So it makes us really come to grip with our life, with our age, with what we've done and what we have left and how much we have left. And I don't care who you are in the mind, you're always thinking, how much do I have left, right? How much do I have left? What's left on my checkbook before it's empty and I'm on a negative balance and I go to meet the Lord, right? And I think as we become older, I think our faith becomes an anchor, or it does for me. My faith is what holds me down, holds me to the ground. It's what keeps me steady in the storm. It's what I rely upon. Because I'm not done with my life. Maybe I'm still kind of hanging on to the prime by the tip of my fingernails. I really don't know where I'm at. Can't really tell you. I've tried to figure that out. It's just hard to figure it out. But anyway, the truth is that I know I'm in transition. I know that my life is changing, and life always changes. But the point of these sermons is to make us think about where we're at with God in all the different phases of our life. And I hope it makes us think, and it makes you understand that your life's going to change. Things are going to change. You're never going to stay on that plateau. Things are going to change in your life. Children, growing up, school, jobs, marriage, life. You know, I've lived quite a bit of it. I hope I have a little left. But I want to promise you, in all them things I can tell you, the one thing in my life that's been one thing that's been steady throughout my entire life has been my God. You know, faith holds us to the ground. It holds us together. In young people, middle-aged people, people with kids, people who are silver, there's one thing I can promise you if you look around this room. Everybody in this room is better because we have God in our lives. And that never changes. We're going to talk about that next week. Thanks for your time this morning. I hope this makes you think. I hope you think of where you're at with your God, with your faith, with your life. I hope it makes you understand this life is fleeting and the things that are important, God, family, are the things that we need to hold on to. In the end, nothing else really matters in the end. Thanks for your time this morning. If we can help you, won't you let it be known while we stand.